Hello, everybody, and welcome back to From the Ground Up, Western Cover Crop Pacific Northwest Subregional Conference Series number 3. I'd like to welcome you. My name is Steve Hines. I'm with the University of Idaho Extension. Today's topics are going to focus on dryland and irrigated systems of the inland Pacific Northwest. I would like to mention that this conference is being sponsored by a grant from the Western SARE, and we really appreciate their support of our program. I'd like to start the day off with our first speaker, Leslie Michel. She is with the Washington State Department of Agriculture and is going to visit with you about cover crop use in dryland wheat-fallow systems. Leslie, welcome.
Thanks, Steve. As Steve said, I am with the Washington State Department of Agriculture. I'm a soil scientist there. I work for a division at WSDA called NRAS, the Natural Resources Assessment Section. We're about 12 full-time staff, and we're really the science branch of WSDA. Right now, we have 3 kind of big soil health portions of soil health. We're working on the Washington State Soil Health Initiative. And that is collaborative between Washington State University, WSDA, and the Washington State Conservation Commission, where we're really trying to get a baseline of soil health in Washington. And that's figuring out what is soil health, what's that look like in Washington. And we have a program called Sustainable Farms and Fields, and that's really looking at carbon and carbon storage in Washington and trying to create for what might be in the future a grant type program. And then I'm working with Dr. Deirdre Griffin-LaHue on a specialty crop block grant, and we're out measuring 7 different specialty crops: potatoes, sweet corn, hops. Those are a few of them. And we're really looking at baseline of a producer's best field, worst field, and measuring soil health indicators in those different fields and looking at comparisons for that. So that's some of the current projects we have going on. They often change over time, but that gives you a little bit of history. Today, I'm going to talk about 3 different projects that I've done in the past. And if you've been around dryland wheat historically, you've probably heard me talk about some of these projects. One is a very large assessment that we did on cover crops in dryland wheat. Another is on those cover crops, again in dryland wheat, where we brought livestock onto grazing, and then just kind of a follow-up of producers and how they've changed those practices over time. So if we look at where we've done some of these studies, it's been in the north central Washington area, mostly in Douglas County and a little bit in Grant and Lincoln, and then looking up into Okanagan area. A lot of this was started in 2014, 2015, and I worked over about 22 different farms over those 5 years. And this area really encompasses about a huge area is where we did all these trials. Each farm planted about 5 acres on the larger of the plot, and we did a couple different treatments. So what we did is we went in, you have your typical wheat fallow rotation, and we planted that cover crop during that fallow rotation. So let's just put those on there. So what we did is, if you have your typical wheat fallow rotation and your typical chem fallow, we planted that fall cover crop. We did these 3 different treatments. Fall cover crop we planted during that September, October. Usually producers planted those cover crops when they could get back into the field. So it was often the lowest priority for producers to get out there, which was a little unfortunate because the cover crop often didn't have the best chance to get growing and get established. And that grew through to the spring. We often found with that fall cover crop that producers had a really hard time with weed control on the fall cover crop, just because of these planting dates. The spring cover crop was usually planted in April after they could get one herbicide application out there. So if they got out, did a spray application, then they could go in and get that spring cover crop mix. Both the fall and the spring cover crops were usually cool season mixes, and I'll show you what some of those species would be. And then they were usually grown for about 8 weeks. We did this usually on about 20 farms per year. So farmers kind of run this how they would run anything else. It was kind of as they saw fit. Tried to encourage them to terminate at bloom, because we know that that's when those cover crops start to use more moisture. And then that summer cover crop, we tried to use warm species mixes, or warm species, species. So those we planted after last risk of frost. And we usually got probably 2 herbicide passes in before those. And so that really helped with the weed control in the summer prior to that planting. And those we really could only get about 6 weeks of growth before we had to terminate those. But we often got a really good biomass coverage from the summer cover crop. So some of the species that we used a lot in these mixes were triticale, barley, oats in the cool season, sorghum, Sudan grass, and millet I really like for the warm season. We did a lot of winter peas and spring peas. We tried to plant some of the other warm season legumes such as fava beans, cowpeas, sun hemp. We didn't find a lot of success from that. We're in a really low rainfall, so if you're in a higher rainfall, it might work better for you, but we're about 8 to 10, 12 inches of rainfall. So there's just not enough moisture, enough heat units. We're to 2,500 feet elevation. So just not enough there for some of those warm season legumes to really get going. And then the turnips, sunflowers, and flax we used a lot of purple top turnips, radishes, especially in our grazing mixes. The cows really like the purple top turnips. I will mention that here and elsewhere, we have used corn in some of our summer mixes, and if you overwinter that, that can spread on the mosaic wheat virus, and that's caused some problems with disease. And so just think twice about your rotation and such before you use that. So what we found, I had a really big table of all my data in here, and I decided to take that out because it gets really confusing and it's hard to read. But what we found from all of these treatments is that pH increased in all of our treatments, not necessarily all of the plots. And so in the fall treatments, that was about 93% of the plots over all the years that increased. In summer, that was about 73%. So a pretty large percentage of the plots had increase in pH. So definitely something for you guys to consider, especially those who are dealing with low pH issues, that cover crops may help deal with some of that. More research is probably needed. We did have a decreased yield overall, and most of that yield was within that 10%, but about, I think that was 60% of yield was reduced in fall, and it was closer to 80% of plots in the summer were reduced. As far as the micronutrients and nitrate and all of those other things, fall had the greatest overall positive effect. So it had really good positive effect on the micronutrients, while having a lesser effect on soil nitrogen, nitrate, those sorts of things. Whereas summer had a least positive effect. So it didn't have as big of an effect on those micronutrients, and it had a bigger effect on things like nitrate. Some of this probably has to do with the length of time that cover crop is in the ground, but certainly some of these aspects need to be looked at a little bit more. I'm in the process of finishing up my thesis and hoping to defend here soon. So some of this data should be published in the near future. As far as the summer grazing study that we did, we did a couple different plots where we went and put these out. What we did was we put that summer cover crop in there, and then we followed that. We left that all year, left that residue out there after grazing, and then we followed that because it was so dry we couldn't get a fall treatment in there. So we followed that with a spring cash crop. And what we found from the 5 fields that we were able to get yield from is that 4 out of 5 increased yield. 3 of those, it was by more than 10%. So there's a benefit there. However, as you all know, if you plant a spring crop rather than a fall crop, you're already at a loss for some profit. We did put the cows out there, and we used cow-calf pairs. Unfortunately, we had some, these are all on-farm trials, which are super fun to do, but a lot of things depend on the producers. And so we weren't able to get weights on all the cows, but when we did, we saw really good gains on those calves, often to the tune of about 3.5 pounds per day. The producers moved from this style. We had decided this style would be the best based on our previous research, so we moved to this style. And then we moved into, here's the yield. And then we moved into this winter feedstock interplanting. So producer have started interplanting cover crops with something like triticale or wheat. So the one example I have for you is that interplanted cover crop in with the triticale. We grazed that for about 30 days, and that was early January to mid-February, about February 8th. We put 150 cow-calf pairs out there. It was 300 acres that we put them out there. The farmer said he had about $5 per day of feed savings in those. So multiplied $5 a day times 150 cow-calf pairs for 30 days, that gave a savings of $22,500 in savings over that course of that time. We did end up having to put some straw or some triticale out there. What happened is that the cows were intaking so much snow in with that feed that they were getting a little too much water, so they were getting washed out. But figure about $75 an acre in savings and that's just on feed costs with that winter feed stock. That was one of the fields where we had the wheat mosaic in, and so we had a pretty big yield loss on that. but the year prior, which is the field you're looking at there, we had 1,000 pounds less yield for triticale than you would typically see for that. So I'll leave some of that for some of this other stuff. If you have pulses and you're in Washington and you want to participate in our soil health survey that we're doing, you can contact me and we'll come out and test your soils. And there's my information. So that's my 15-minute rundown of cover crops.
All right. Thanks, Leslie.